we have Mr. Doug Ferris. So Doug is currently the managing director of Silverwind Enterprises, the counseling and investing group, and serves as an executive advisor to management teams following acquisition. He also consults on M&A, financial performance, and generational transition. He is the chairman of the board of the Professional Association of Resume Writers and Career Coaches, a board advisor of DNR Media, and the president, board of director of the Rotary Club of St. Petersburg. Previously, he served on the board of trustees of Firelands Regional Health and led a shift towards digital media at Sandusky News Group. He has experience in managing dispersed organizations and has special insight into family-owned and tightly held businesses. He is an award-winning business columnist, and he shares his leadership insights on the editor and publisher website. Please welcome Doug.
So the resume sounds fantastic. I paid someone to write it, so I'm glad it sounds good. End of days, most of my career has been taking big thoughts and putting them into real action, and whether that's in a large corporation or a small setting. That's to a large degree what I have done and what I do in a variety of settings. As we talk today about culture, I want you to think about how do I take the big idea of building a culture that is going to be attractive and help retain people and put that into action. So I'm going to give you a couple of tips for each thing that we talk about. The perfect culture does not exist today. Don't chase it. What you need to find is something that works for you and for your business, because we're in a very transitional state for a whole lot of reasons. Curiously, more about me, there we go. Curiously, does everybody know what generation they fall into? So I'd like to know, just by a quick show of hands, what your cohort is. Do we have anybody in here that would be considered a traditionalist born before 1945? Maybe out in the dining room outside. Okay, just checking. What are boomers? How many boomers do we have? Identify as boomers? How about Gen X? Millennials? Any Zs? Okay, there we go. The little blue arrow at the bottom is me. I sit there right on the bridge between the boomers and the X. And I've done a whole lot of reading and a whole lot of studying on these things, and I exhibit characteristics in the workplace on both sides of the fence. It can be very frustrating and very distracting, because some days I react like a boomer and some days I react like an X. So think about how you think and how you act and react in the workplace, because we're coming to a spot where it's changed on us. Generation X is no longer going to be in control. The millennials are in control. Got my slides backwards. The millennials are in control, as we saw, and Deethra, thank you very much. They're moving into the workforce. And at this point in the game, the boomers are no longer the dominant force. Most of the world has organized themselves around the way boomers work and around boomers think. So as you start attacking culture and looking at culture, employee retention, and employee retention, you really have to think about, I can't operate the way maybe I was organized to operate. I can't think about running a workplace and communicating with people that way. I'd be happy to provide these slides later. They're kind of blurry, so not so easy to read. What you're gonna find and what you're gonna hear a whole lot about is they're not gonna operate the same way. You're gonna have to communicate a whole lot more, and you're gonna have to engage in non-traditional ways a whole lot more than you have in the past if you hope to attract and retain and build a culture that makes sense for you. And generational stereotypes don't necessarily hold all the time. There are ways of thinking. Boomers are very hierarchical. The X's, they like to have a little more free-flowing stuff. The millennials, all the rules are gone. It's all independent and they're mercenary. There are also impacts that happen, and it's important to think about as you manage a diverse workplace and a workplace with a lot of different people, that people are impacted by the period they are in their life cycle. So, are they family formation? Are they right out of college? Are they post-child? That's going to impact folks regardless of what generation they're in and how they think and how they work and what they need. The period they were born in and the cohorts we just talked about are going to be influential and impactful. The Xers saw the end of the Cold War, and that was very decisive and very crystallizing in their head. It was an impact piece that it impacted and has changed all of them. The Xers are coming up and the millennials are coming up in a world, financial uncertainty, the Great Recession, and the complete lack of faith in business to actually care for you as an individual. But make no mistake, Deethra talked about this. I'm losing my slides, sorry folks. There we go. Make no mistake about this, labor is in control. We saw that, the numbers up here. It is not just a Pinellas County issue, it is the US workforce. It's probably a Western society issue at this point. Labor is in control. Are we familiar with the Great Resignation? We've all heard about that, we've written about that. The Great Resignation is real. You saw the exiting in the workforce. There is a desire for life-work balance that is stronger now, influenced by the impacts of the COVID pandemic in a way that it was starting before, but that gave license and gave people the ability to embrace and actually do something about life-work balance. So as I was going through some of these slide decks, I was reading an interesting quote from a boomer who said, I just thought we were supposed to work all the time. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? In counseling a millennial, and the millennial's like, no, you're not supposed to work all the time. You're supposed to go surf and go rock climbing and do other stuff, and you can also work too to pay for it. And that's a real generational shift. That is impacting everything. The retirements, you saw the data and the stats, we're losing folks at the top end of the cycle. And a lot of folks didn't come back after COVID, they're not gonna come back. Other little impacts, homeschooling. We lost some significant portion of women in the school-bearing age that are just choosing not to go back. They would rather spend the time with their kids, they figured out how to do it. All those little impacts are taking people out of the workforce. So as you think about what do I do with that, great Doug, there's nobody here, Deethra said there's nobody here, and now Kay said that I have to run background checks, so basically I can't hire anybody but like the random guy on the street. So what do I do about that? Think about a couple of things. First off, I'm just curious, is there anybody in this room that is understaffed today? As a business that's understaffed? Maybe I should ask it the other way. Does anybody feel like they're completely full staff and everything's wonderful? There you go. So we are at full employment, it's just gonna get worse. And employment attraction does not work the way it used to. So I have a fond memory, and my wife was kind enough to join me today, of us being very new into our lives. We had purchased our first house, we both had jobs we hated, and what we were gonna do is find new jobs. So that meant getting up early on Sunday morning, going to the grocery store, buying a copy of the Chicago Tribune, which is where we live, and pawing through the 175 pages of help wanted ads. Because if you wanted to employ somebody in that market, that's where you went. Insert any other newspaper, any other market. It was a pretty easy deal. You mailed off 20 resumes, 20 crappy letters, and you hoped 3 weeks later you'd hear something back. It was a simple marketplace. Today it is not that at all that simple. There are 1,000 different places people post jobs and 1,000 different ways to respond, and for every job, there are 25 to 30 times more applicants that are unqualified applying because there's no barrier to entry. There's no friction in the application process. So today, labor's in control because in 3 minutes, I can apply to 400 jobs. Where before I had to lick a stamp, write a letter, send an email, do something that made sense. So acquisition's gonna be a little more interesting and a little more tough. Does anybody have a referral program with existing staff to bring people in? I've heard some great luck with this. Do you like it? Folks that are using it? So if you're not running a referral program now, consider it. Throw cash at it. Throw cash or time at existing employees, because the culture within your building is something that if people are there, they want it, they understand it, they like it. They're not gonna bring somebody in who doesn't fit, who's gonna damage that workplace culture, because that's their living and that's where they're making their life. People respond to a lot of different things. But right now, 62% of the adult workforce lives paycheck to paycheck, 2/3. So depending on who you're employing, and I'm guessing if you're sitting in this room, you're probably not in the paycheck to paycheck variety. But my guess is that there are people within your organization who are. I've owned companies that are exactly like that, and I know if you miss a bonus or you miss a day on a payroll cycle, that's a big deal. So if you've got folks that are like that, find ways to throw some cash at them or throw some opportunities at them to help them bring staff in. They're likely to do that. Of those 62% people, half of them, so 30% of the adult workforce has second jobs. I don't know that you care if you're the first job or the second job. In fact, one of the companies I work with very closely specialized in helping bring people in as a second job. and they would just take them in for a shift, get them in for a shift, but wow them with culture, figure out what their financial needs were, and eventually convert them to a primary employee. So open yourself up to, can I hire people in secondary roles and maybe work on converting them if I like them? It's a non-traditional recruitment technique, but something that might work. Other things you're going to need to look at, rebounds. We had the great resignation, we have the great regret. So a whole lot of people jumped and went and did something else because the money was good, the opportunity sounded good, this, that, the other thing. Maybe it wasn't. The grass is not always greener. Take a look at people you lost over the last year or two, reach out to them. If you like them, there's a chance they might actually be willing to come back. So give them a ring, give them a call. That's a good way to get people in. They already know your culture, they already know your stuff. Consider folks that have left the workplace. One of the companies that we own has just hired a wonderful person to do customer service for them. She's 72 years old. She had been the receptionist at my chiropractor's office. And I knew she was retiring, and I couldn't believe it. And I got to talking to her about it. She's like, I just can't do the everyday thing anymore. This woman was fabulous. There was never a time I left without a second appointment, without buying some balm I did not want to have, without agreeing to some kind of program I didn't care about. And she smiled, was happy, and loved doing it. But her daughter was having kids, and she didn't want to be locked down to a regular schedule. She's a firecracker who wasn't going to go back into the workplace, but was offered a highly flexible job. I could work 2 or 3 days this week and then take a week off. Bam, was all over it. You may not have that job today, but think about what kind of things are getting done in your company or not getting done in your company that someone on a flexi schedule like that could do. Look at military, look at non-traditional locations, look at convicts, people that have been recently released. Not everybody coming out of prison is going to go back to prison. Take a look at it. There's a whole lot of folks that are ready to work, but I'm sorry about the background check thing. They're going to go through it, and they might not think they'll be welcomed into your organization. Have frank conversations, put guardrails on it. There's a lot of folks out there that are willing to work and can work. You're just going to have to really open yourself up a whole lot to building a culture. But remember, we're coming into a period where your company is not their family. And boomers, if that's what you used to remember, don't use that word. I actually had a millennial manager take me aside and correct me one day. Don't say family. We work together, it's a workplace, we care about each other. You're not their family. They have jobs, they have lives. Don't make that mistake. That was a pretty tough one. The work-life balance increases the younger they get. So people that are in their 40s are going to have less demand for work-life balance than people in their 20s. That seems to be holding. And so it might just be getting worse as we go. And remember, you're entering the period of cult of the individual and the mercenary. People are about themselves, they're about doing it. They'll come in and work, but they're going to work and do the job and they're going to leave. They're not going to care about this place once they walk out. They'll give you what they owe you, but that's it. Let's talk about the workplace. So who worked from home for a while during COVID? Yeah, I had to go find real dress shoes, like when that was over, and it hurt to put things with laces on. I'm telling you, that was rough. That period may or may not be ending. Who has the possibility of that in your workplace right now? Do you have any work from home still going on? A lot of companies are starting to shift back. They're starting to say, we want you to come in, we want you to come in. Right now, 71% of those people working remotely are reluctant to come back to the office. And there is a whole lot of stories of people leaving work, leaving jobs they like because they're being forced to come back in. I'm not telling you have to or not have to, but if you were able to figure it out before, continue figuring it out. Time versus money, work-life balance. People value time sometimes as much or more than money. So be smart about that. I know when I went working from full-time in a corporate office and I virtualized the headquarters of our corporation, I was a 9-10 hour a day guy because you had to be there, you had to do it. I started working virtually out of my garage, quite literally, when I moved to Florida, and I was starting to work 6-hour days. Now my productivity had not decreased. In fact, my productivity almost increased. But I wasn't driving there, I wasn't getting cleaned up necessarily from putting on a suit for the office. I was getting my work done, I was having my meeting calls, and then I'd have time to walk the dog. So time is more important than money for a lot of folks. And unlimited paid time off does not work. Silicon Valley, who pioneered that, has finally released the research. Unlimited paid time off, people that are offered as much as you want, take whatever you can get, use less time off than people that have only 2 weeks of paid vacation. because they're scared to use it, they don't want to use it, they never get around to use it because it is absolutely available all the time. Set defined paid time off, use it. People will appreciate that. And be flexible. One of the companies I work with regularly set up an interesting schedule. They were struggling to get people to take certain shifts during the week. It was a customer-facing role. There needed to be 5 people per shift. And there was enough people on the team, but they didn't always want to work those shifts. So finally, the scheduling manager said, I'm really kind of tired of this. Here's the deal. Everybody's required to work X number of shifts, whatever you signed up for. Organize yourself. A little scary, right? The rule was, you can work whatever schedule you want, but every shift has to be covered every week. After 2 very rough weeks, they figured it out. And the scheduling manager stopped being in the middle. There was some horse trading, there was some haggling, but everybody got to pick schedules. It was very easy for them to flex the schedules back and forth. Not every team can handle that, but that really provided that work-life balance. That was a very young team, so it made a big difference. And engage people. When I first started, my very first corporate job, when I had it as a division chair, I recall getting my month-end financial and my statement in an envelope, and it was sealed, and there was a little happy face on it. And that was all I knew about the company performance. There was some very limited data about my stuff on the inside. I worked there for years, and the only way you knew how the company did that period was the smiley face or the sad face. That is not an engaged, informed workplace. The next organization I went to work for, I stepped up a level, department manager. On my desk was a full set of company financials my 3rd day in. Like every element, every piece, profit and loss, revenues, all the data, all the stats. I'm like, well, what's going on with this? My boss said, well, how are you going to help us be successful if you don't know what it looks like? So those are 2 very interesting things. That first company I went to work with, they imploded about 4 years later. That second company, in a very struggling industry, is still successful and still thriving because they engage people and they gave people the information they needed. So, culture points for the workplace. Define what needs to be done and engage people in getting it done themselves. Tell them what the end game is, not what the little pieces are. If you're making a watch, don't tell them how to make a watch. Tell them I need to know what time it is. Let them figure out the parts that go into the watch. Get people in the right roles. A lot of research is actually codifying the difference between fluid and crystallized intelligence now, which are fancy terms that I just read a whole book on them, which is why I can use them. But you've all heard the fact that like a whole lot of scientists tend to do their breakthrough work. The PhD candidates do all their breakthrough work by about the age of 40. Have you heard this? Okay, you should read more then. Because yes, absolutely. Most PhD people have done their research and done the thing that they earn a Nobel laureates, sorry. Most Nobel laureate work is done before the age of 40 or in their early 40s. There is an emerging psychological trend of fluid intelligence, which is up to about your mid-40s. You're thinking, your brain's changing, it's rewiring, it's exploring, it's thinking, it's innovating. But then you start shift to crystallized intelligence, which means you're relying more on what you know, what you've learned, and applying that paradigm backwards. So here's what I'm telling you. It means the older folks that have been in the workplace for a while are not so good at adapting, but they got a whole lot of life lessons that you can apply to things. The folks that are newer in the workplace are a whole lot about let's try this, let's do this, because I don't know any better. And if you can meld those 2 together by getting the wisdom coupled with the energy, that makes a lot of sense. Some crazy old guy I worked for a lot of years, his advice to me when I was an up-and-coming manager was, Doug, keep the young people close. They'll keep you young, they'll make you smart. He was Southern, and he was right. All right, a couple more things and I'll get out of your hair. If you're going to be a leader in this marketplace, this shifting cultural workplace, you need to really understand that Peter Drucker was right. Culture is going to eat strategy. That's all there is to it. Worked with an organization where we had to restructure 2 operating units. They looked a lot alike. They were very similar to each other, but they were separated by a couple of states. They all needed to figure out, how do I be better faster? We reorganized both companies, gave them a lot of latitude to do those things. One of them came through about a year and a half later in spectacular fashion. Changed their teams, changed their focus, changed everything. The other one, every time I went to visit, they would look at me with sad eyes and say, well, we're getting by, even though, we had to change things. That was speed of the leader. Because the one organization had somebody that said, I'm going to set a strategy and a culture that match each other. The other one said, what we had before was kind of nice and we really, really liked it, but the boss says we have to do different. So if you're going to lead in this environment, all the things that I gave you before, what I would tell you is it's all about the speed of the leader and setting a culture that is adaptive, that recognizes what people in your workforce want. You'll get a workforce that makes sense. I got like 30 more slides, but I'll be done now.
All three of you talked about getting outside the box for finding employees or, maybe fishing in different ponds. If any one of you or all three of you would mention maybe the most out there situation that you've had where an employer or ways that they've gotten new employees or found better talent that have worked for them, I'd love to hear any examples that you have.
Referrals do seem to work the best. I am not above, and I have several times handed my business card to waitstaff. I know that sounds like an old trope, but I do it earnestly, and sometimes I have a $20 bill around it. That helps. Recruited a very great person sitting next to me at Rotary one day, visiting student, coming back to the States, needed to have some work. You just got to ask. A lot of times you got to ask in uncomfortable ways.
As AI advances, things like ChatGPT, what do you think the impacts are going to be to our workforce?
Thanks. So I started my career, a lot of my career in the news media business, and there was already automated work starting there 10 years ago to rewrite sports stories and scared people. It's coming for white collar. It's coming for middle management and white collar. It's coming. So it's going to start working its way in. Technology's going to start getting better, and a lot of the stuff in the middle is going away.